So great to have you, Kevin. Thank you.
Hi, folks. I'm just going to adjust. I guess I can see what's going on there. Happy to represent the home growers here today.
Would you mind holding the mic? I just want to
Sure.
make sure
That everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
There we go. Hi, folks. So I am not a researcher. I'm not an academic. Bless all of those folks. I am an entrepreneur, much to my chagrin, many times. And so I'm going to take you through a little bit about what I've done. I've been involved in transportation for a while now. And the reason I'm setting that up is that I am have not very often approached anything that I've done specifically about equity or social justice, although in a greater sense, the things that I've been working on have gone towards that, but I'm not necessarily an expert in those areas. The date there is Feb 96. That was the first time that we got media coverage for working on shared mobility in English Canada. I am a co-founder of what's now called Moto, the car co-op in Vancouver, British Columbia. Today there's over 800 cars in cities like Victoria and Kelowna and Vancouver. And we, before this, I'm also a co-founder of Evergreen, famous in Toronto for the brickworks and elsewhere across Canada for bringing nature into cities and onto school grounds and things like that. So I started with a charity. I moved to a co-op and then came to Toronto and started a for-profit here called AutoShare in 1998. And all of these companies were dealing with improving life in the city. And with car sharing, I saw an opportunity to take the fantastic invention that is the car and try and provide an alternative that people actually wanted to choose rather than was forced on them. I sold that about 5 years ago. I apologize. I do like to show this photo from the Globe and Mail. I spent a couple of years at a technology company that had some transportation, was building some transportation platforms. And I even spent a year and a half with a car company, most recently, their brand Free to Move, based, I was working a lot in the US, but it's owned by the car company Peugeot. And now I'm starting all over again at the grassroots homegrown level with a company that we're going to call Zygg, which will be a personal e-bike subscription company starting here in Toronto and moving elsewhere in the spring. So a lot of what I did over the years actually came more from an environmental point of view than accessibility or some of the other things that are being talked about here. Although I will say that, kind of one of the great theses of my life is kind of this circle where you start off, you want to plant a tree, and then you realize that you planted the wrong kind of tree, and you figure out what kinds of trees you need to plant, and this was around Evergreen, and we planted trees on school grounds, and then you realized, okay, you got to deal with the school board and that sort of stuff, and as you realize everything, and now you have to change school board policy if you're going to plant trees and create natural areas on school grounds and integrate them with the school curriculum, and you start going around, and then you realize inevitably that all of this stuff is connected to social justice. And then you kind of get overwhelmed, and all you want to do is dig a hole in the woods and climb in, and you come back around to the bottom and you go, okay, maybe I'll just plant a tree. So, obviously climate change is a big issue, and, people, basically some great talks I've seen today, and a lot of this stuff has been covered. So, I'll just sort of go through this, and this is where I'm coming from. And, people typically need a car to get to work. That's one of the big things that's tough to change. This is not my joke. Lots of people have used it before, but some of the issues around autonomous vehicles and some of the other kind of magic bullets that people want to invent so that we can kind of go on doing what we're doing without addressing really some of the bigger changes that need to get addressed. And certainly, I think from a government point of view here in Ontario, that the government here is really stuck on trying to figure out how to build autonomous cars in Ontario to sort of backfill the car companies that are pulling out. And rather than looking at some of the other opportunities that we might be able to start working on. Transit is key, whether it's to what extent, and I'm a tech futurist, all that sort of stuff, and so to what extent non-fixed route or it can help complement the fixed route, whatever it is, but really, and I don't have the statement quite right, but there's something about the fact that from an equity point of view, people who are taking transit are probably or are lower income than people who are driving. And there's something about when I touched later on, and lots of people have touched on, and Ms. Blumenberg talked about, that slide about basically pricing the roads and about that is like, there's a question about whether if we price the roads, is that an anti-equity kind of thing? But really, it is going to be delivering equity when you look at who's going to benefit from better transit. Bike sharing, there's some things, I love bike sharing. It's part of, I believe it is part of transit, and that there, I don't have stats on kind of who's using it and that sort of stuff. I live close, I live on the east side of Toronto, and you certainly see bike share racks near St. Jamestown and Regent Park and that sort of stuff are getting a lot of use. I know in Chicago they've done some studies and they're working hard to get it to underserved places. So I think that, bicycles certainly can play a role in that. I put this stat up here, about 700,000 rides per day in Mexico City on their bike share program. And they're at Evergreen Brickworks yesterday and today, they've got this thing called Future Cities Social Innovation Conference. And an amazing woman, Gabriela Gomez-Mont, I believe, from the City Labs de Ciudad. Sorry? Which is closed down. Well, she talked about a lot of things, and really amazing discussion, both about bike sharing there and kind of how it's impacting the city and the people that live there, and also this really amazing thing because they're all like a jitney service in Mexico City, and they did this crowdsourcing thing for people to map where all these jitney lines go and all that sort of stuff. Anyways. So, people have talked about bike sharing. This is Uber's Jump electric bikes, scooters happening all over the place, and the rise of this concept of platforms, something like an Expedia for urban mobility. Based in Montreal, there's a great platform called Transit App. They work with transit agencies. But there's also lots of other ones, including the company that I used to work for. And nowadays, even Lyft is buying bike shares, Uber, and creating their own kind of internal platforms, let's say, of multimodal kinds of things. This is Uber and some of the various services that they provide. There's another slide I didn't include. In East Asia, the big ones there, Gojek and Grab, have 25 or 40 different things that they're providing, including banking services and all kinds of stuff. So platform is a big deal. These are already on our sidewalks and competing for space, and will be competing for space more. There may be quite a lot of them. And what we're sort of getting at is that there's increasingly a competition for space in the city that we're going to have to discuss here. This is, Uber is not happy with what Los Angeles is asking them to do in terms of data and some other things. Luckily, we're not dealing with this in North America. This was in China after the rise of bike share a couple of years ago. But all of this to sort of say that the city is the platform, and everybody in these businesses wants access to the city, to people, to curb space, to the roads, to the sidewalks. And it's really important. And the good news is that cities in the last little while are coming back and starting to set rules and regulations around it. But this is really key, and this is kind of where the private meets the civic. So, for instance, in Los Angeles, they've got a new standard for data. If you want to deliver certain kinds of services in there, then you have to make it available through this MDS standard. That's what Uber is not happy with. Is it perfect? I'm not sure. Certainly someone like Adam probably knows a lot about this kind of thing. Absolutely, privacy is an issue, making sure that people can't find out where people live and that sort of stuff from this data. But from an economic point of view, from a consumer point of view, open data is good. This is a slide from Horace Dediu, Micro Mobility Industries. Basically, he's got some great slides. This is one of about 30 that tells this story, but that basically half of all of the US car VMT in a year, which is somewhere around 1 trillion, is less than 14 miles and could be done on some of the new kinds of vehicles that are being invented, like scooters and bikes and bike-like things, and that there's a huge opportunity for small, light, slow vehicles. When we're talking about equity, people have already talked about, again, about improving the roads, making things safer, and for some of the kinds of vehicles that could help us replace cars. This is a Vancouver-based company called Velometro. They've already tested this in Vancouver and are building some to get some to deploy them into public. People have obviously looked at these ideas for a while. Safe and slow lanes. This is also a movement happening right now. Again, it's been touched on today, but rather than just building more bike lanes, really looking at full lanes. And so that some of these vehicles that we can now build, if you need it enclosed, if you need it 3-4 wheels for balance and all that sort of stuff. But we don't need to build Ford F-150s or GM Sierras or whatever they are to move us around the city. And what we need to do is look at building some of those kinds of lanes. So slow lanes. This is a kind of an equity thing. This is an on-street space in Toronto. 1 minute. On-street space in Toronto, in front of somebody's house, let's say. If you live nearby, you can rent that for 85 cents a day, approximately, to park your car. If you are Communato or when they were here, Car2Go or another car sharing company, you're going to get charged $4 a day. In other words, that's the market rate, and we're subsidizing mostly homeowners to be able to park their cars on the streets. And what we can't do is use some other kinds of uses for it. So, for instance, the company that I'm starting, Zygg, maybe we could rent a spot and allow people in the neighborhood to park their electric vehicles or their cargo bikes or whatever else they might have. So, and as somebody said, we can't do anything really moving ahead without charging for roads. For anyone who lives in Toronto, spending an extra $1 billion on this piece of infrastructure rather than something else seems awfully regressive. So that's it for me today. Thank you, folks.